So I had a student ask me what mistakes I made earlier in my career that I wish I could go back and redo and not make those mistakes because they took me a lot longer to progress than if I had skipped those mistakes. So what I thought I'd do is do a little series of videos here where I go over each of those, what I consider mistakes or things that I could have done better. So hopefully you guys can avoid those sooner rather than later, or hopefully you're already smarter than me and you've already avoided them. First one I want to deal with is this idea of using play-alongs. Before we go any further, there's nothing wrong with play-alongs. They do actually have a lot of value, and we're going to get into some reasons why there are play-alongs and all of that. So this is not a straight-up diss on using drummerless play-alongs. When I was in college, I started working, I decided to get serious about playing jazz, and I went to PASIC, and I went to all the clinics, and I got a whole bunch of the books. And when I got back, I was like practicing all the time out of these books and using these play-alongs, you know, where there's no drummer and it's just, you know, it's basically everything but the drummer's been removed and you can just get to put yourself right in the driver's seat. And I used those for a long time, but there was another guy at school who was way farther down the road than I was. He actually sounded like a real jazz drummer. Lord knows I did not at that point. And I heard him practicing one day, and so when he came out of the practice room, I was like, hey, man, like, what are you working on? And he said, oh, I'm just playing along to this record. I don't remember what record it was, but it doesn't really matter which record it was. Him just saying, like, he's just playing along with a record, it was like this big light bulb, this watershed moment, like, oh, yeah, like every other style of music I've ever been into, I just put on their record or tape because I'm that old. I put on their tape or their CD and I just play along to it. Like when I went through my Vinny with Sting phase, luckily there was no like drummerless play along. The whole point was to play along with Vinny and Sting. I had that 10 Summoners Tales record. I actually had to buy 2 copies. I kept one in my car and then I kept one in my CD player in my practice room because I was too lazy to go out of my practice room, go out to the car and get it, or I would constantly forget it in one place or another. So I had 2 copies because I was constantly playing along to that. And by playing along to it, I started to try to capture some of the feel and some of Vinny's intensity on those tunes. When I went through my James Brown drummer phase, I didn't use a play along. I didn't use something where they removed all of James Brown's drummers' parts. I just played along right with them. I did that for, you know, John Bonham, you name it. I don't know why my brain went to this like, oh, it's jazz. You must study it. It must come from, you know, from the great texts and all this sort of stuff. I don't know why I didn't approach it like I'd approached every other style of music. When I started to just play along to records I really liked, my playing took a huge leap. And after a while, I kind of realized, first of all, the swing feel, I mean, I cannot explain. We talk about forward motion and the intensity of the quarter note and locking up with the bass player and all of that jazz. But the bottom line is the way you develop feel naturally is just by imitating it and being kind of inside that feel for a long time. That's how I started to all of a sudden start to swing, is because I was playing along with great musicians and great bands. But when I was playing along to these great bands, what was nice is I had, let's say I was doing a record with Philly Joe on it, right? So I'm playing along. Now, not only am I trying to like match what he's playing in terms of like his intensity, where he's putting that ride cymbal note, and I'm not at all intellectualizing, well, he was putting it just a slight partial behind the bass player or any of that stuff. I'm just trying to sound like Philly Joe, right? And I'm letting my natural, I didn't know it at the time, but I'm letting my natural instinct to, as humans, to imitate and then kind of absorb. I'm letting that run its course. And by the way, I'm putting in like crazy amounts of practice time because I'm just playing along to records for hours and hours, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm playing along to these records, and I'm trying to like capture that vibe of Philly Joe, and then I go to play a fill, and I can hear in my headphones, Philly didn't play anything there. And that was kind of like a signal, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be comping it up through this section. Or all of a sudden some big moment happens, and then Philly's like, it's almost like Philly Joe was right there saying, like, don't play that, kid. Watch this. Play that. And then I would, like, rewind it, and I would pick up exactly, oh, that was a cool phrase. Let me pick that up. That learning process made a huge difference for me. And I would still use play-alongs from time to time to do things. But in general, if you're trying to capture all this great sound in your playing, you're likely not going to get it from a play-along. Play-alongs have a purpose, but they have a limited purpose. There's no way you're going to capture that feeling the way you would in other styles of music by not playing along to this guy. So you've got a master drummer in your ear playing right along next to you. By the way, you also have a phenomenal bass player, right? So if I'm practicing, I'm playing along, I want PC as my bass player, or Ray Brown, or Oscar Pettiford, or you name it. I want these great bass players because I'm trying to hook up with them. Getting into these records and playing along to them, not only does it help you get your feel together, I mean, really get your feel together, not just like ting, ting, ka-ting, I can play this in time, but the actual feel. But it also teaches you all this super duper subtle stuff about communicating with the band. Like, I didn't realize it at the time, but I would later go on gigs and I could tell when the soloist was wrapping up, or I could tell when there was about to be a break, or I could tell when, you know, like, we're playing along and I would be like, yeah, I'm gonna do cross stick, clack, like, and drop it in at a spot where it felt right. All of those things I picked up from listening to great records, like playing along to great records. Because again, I'm playing along and I don't know, then all of a sudden Art Blakey starts playing cross stick. I'm like, oh, that's probably a better idea than what I was doing. So then I would start playing cross stick in that spot. And after a while, you start to realize that if you're listening to this music and you're right there playing along with Art Blakey, and Art Blakey does something and you kind of mimic that, after a while, when you hit the bandstand, there'll be some tune you're playing, and all of a sudden that moment will come over you where you can where your sixth musical sense kicks in and goes, ooh, cross stick there. So much easier to pick that up by playing along with Art Blakey and him telling you, hey kid, cross stick, right? Versus like trying to read about how you would use cross stick in this format. And often, you know, Miles Davis's piano players always like to have cross stick behind him because Ahmad Jamal and blah, blah, blah. There's all this great history behind it. And I learned all that later. I learned it on the bandstand by playing along to these records, and then I absorbed it. It was only later that when I heard all these stories about how cross stick came around, I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense, but luckily I didn't have to learn it that way. And again, there's nothing wrong with play-alongs. They have a really good purpose. And also think of it this way, like if I was going to put out a drum book, I would write a bunch of comping exercises and this and that and the other, and then I would have some sort of play along with it, right? When what I would really want to do is put in a Miles Davis CD or put in a John Coltrane CD, or I would burn a bunch of CDRs of them, whatever. I'm pretty sure that's illegal. If I wanted to put out a book, that's what I'd have to do. There's copyright laws, there's all that sort of stuff. Plus, there is value in using play-alongs. So all the great teachers out there who have put out books, most of which I own and have used their play-alongs, there's a reason that they use play-along. So this is not a diss or a dig on using a play-along or why a teacher would create a play-along for you to use. It's more about if that's the majority of your playing time with an ensemble is with a drummerless play-along, you're missing a huge chunk that will come naturally from just playing along to great drummers and playing with great bass players, also playing to classic jazz tunes. So when you go on the bandstand, you'll be surprised. If you really play along to these, you'll be surprised how in the middle of a gig, you'll be like, this kind of sounds like whatever. And then you can create a conversation based on that song. You can play a little comp and all of a sudden the piano player knows that you know that same recording, right? Don't think of this as a bad thing toward play-alongs, but more of make sure that you are spending a ton of time just playing along to records, because chances are everything you've learned, or most of the things you've learned on this journey of playing drums, you've learned by playing along to your heroes. Take that same approach to playing jazz. I think it will make a big difference. Okay, see you on the next one. Good luck.